Welcome to the Africa2100 Podcast, where we demystify entrepreneurship. I am your host, Chudi Obiaya. This season, we are following the journey of those who were in the diaspora, but since returned to the continent and are building impactful ventures. In today's episode, we go behind the scenes of what it takes to start up multiple tech ventures. Our guest for today is Eston Kimani. Welcome, Eston.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you. Been looking forward to having this conversation. So thank you for joining us again. So Eston, to get us going, how would you describe yourself to those of us who do not know you, and what drives the work that you do?
Right. Yeah. So my name is Eston Kimani, and I was born in Kenya. So I consider myself an African at the core of it, and I'm blessed to be, born in this continent and be part of its culture. And yeah, so I think that's primarily like a big lens from which I look or I view the world from is my background. And I, as someone who's very proud and, really believes in, their continent, I'm very much committed and interested to see us doing better and get, improving and moving ahead. So that's why I'm an entrepreneur. I love building new things that don't exist, creating new opportunities, solving problems, and just creating new possibilities, and especially in Africa. So I think that's a short summary, but it ties down to kind of who I am and what I do. And I'm also a family man. I do have 3 girls and 1 boy, and my wife Mia. And family is really important to me. So I think that's it in a nutshell.
Thanks, Eston. Where do you think that love for creating things comes from?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's really an escape. I think building new things is escaping from limitations, and that basically is very empowering. So let's say you're facing a certain problem or issue, and you're trying to figure out how to do it. And when you finally get it done, you feel like a huge sense of accomplishment. So I think I love grappling with problems, and I get like a really big high when I solve those problems, and a lot of satisfaction. So I guess my brain enjoys just toying around with a problem and just holding it there for a long time and trying to figure it out. Yeah.
Do you have any understanding of where that originated from? When you talk about you love solving problems, because I found that to be the exception, especially within our culture. We see a problem as somebody else's to solve. Where does that passion for problem solving come from?
Yeah, it's probably something I should have thought some more about, but I've always loved math, and maybe math involves, problem solving. So I do think that maybe that's just how I am naturally wired. I enjoy kind of, I'm curious. I want to figure out things. So it's, it's hard to say like where exactly it comes from, to be honest, because I've also been someone who enjoys playing lots of board games like chess and checkers since I was a kid. So it's I guess it's just a part of having a curious mind and enjoying doing those kinds of things.
What are some of your earliest memories from your childhood growing up in Kenya?
So one of my most important memories as a kid is being in my grandfather's compound. So my grandfather had four wives, and so he had like four different houses in the same compound. And sometimes he would just sit outside and just look at his grandchildren and call us, give us money, and just sit there. And the fact that I think he was one of those people who started got into entrepreneurship in Kenya very early on, and he was able to build something, a business that's quite significant, together with a number of his friends, and they worked collaboratively together. So I think it was one of those, models of cooperation that are, probably from like starting from the 50s, and that's still actually alive to today. And, the businesses they built are still running. And so I think I love the fact that he was like this powerful man whose people used to come to see. And so I think, and it gave me a sense of, capability, and a sense of pride in like who you are, and the fact that you can create abundance, right? By being wise and making good decisions and working well with others, right? So I think that's one of my earliest memories. Um, and the next one I think is there's once where we decided to build like a toy aeroplane, and we cut out some plastic, found some motors, and put on some wings. And I think when my dad came home that day and saw what I'd built, he said, "Wow, this is really interesting. You could become an aeronautical engineer." And then I said, "So where would I learn to do that?" And he said, "There's a place called MIT." And funny enough, I was only 8 years old, and I will not believe that many years later I would actually end up going to MIT. So that was quite an interesting occurrence.
Oh, wow. It's interesting to hear both the influence of your grandfather and your father. Uh, Tell us about that journey to MIT.
Right. So in Kenya, typically you study for primary school. Everybody does the same exam, right? It probably is similar in a lot of countries in Africa, and you all compete for a sport to go to high school, right? So I did that, and I got into one of the top high schools in Kenya called Starehe Boys Center. And so when I was starting to kind of complete high school, I was kind of with the same mindset, and I was wondering like, where am I gonna go after this? And there was a part of me that was saying, hey, you should try and get into the best universities. Kind of the same way, you've kind of, tried to, got into like a really good high school. So I got curious about going to the US at that point, and I went to the school library and found a book about US universities, and that's where I learned about MIT. And I said, I want to apply to MIT. I think so. I feel like around the time I left to go to the US in Kenya, the economic opportunities were very poor. We still were in the last years of the Moi administration, and everyone was looking for a way out, actually. So people were leaving the country with the idea of never coming back, right? Because it was almost like you're escaping from this place. So that's kind of the attitude I left with. And there were a lot of broken things, a lot of things which didn't work in the country. So when I landed at MIT, or even in Boston, I suddenly was confronted with like a lot of things that were working, right? And it's almost just night and day, like landing in a different planet, right? And I was just stunned by the fact that pretty much everything was working, right? The roads were working well. Um, you know, people who are going to school, people who are coming up with these really brilliant ideas and actually executing on them. And it was just a completely mind-blowing experience in terms of, wow, it's possible to like get. So I was wondering, like, for a long time, like, what's wrong with what's going on at home, because like, how come we're almost like the opposite of this? So it's something that kept me actually, thinking for a long time. And the direction basically my brain took was to say, hey, what if we could like bring this level of like, getting things done and efficiency and just problem solving back to Africa? Wouldn't that be really awesome? So I think that's the seed that got planted in me as I lived in the US and hung out around MIT and saw all these great innovations and just a lot of good things happening over there.
So I'm not hearing any homesickness. You weren't homesick. How was the transition?
Yeah, I think there was a big transition, and I think one of the great things about being away for a long time is you also start to realize that there's stuff you had at home that you no longer have. So as much as I was like in huge admiration for like all this technology and all these great things in the US, I also started missing things back home. I think first of all, socially, I just missed the way in Kenya you could walk up to pretty much everyone and have like a good conversation with them. It made you feel very included and part of kind of the society. And then I also think that I think for me as a Kenyan who probably in Kenya I was part of kind of the mainstream, or I felt very comfortable in my skin. Um, Suddenly in the US, I was confronted by the fact that a lot of times because of my skin color, or it seemed like we were at the bottom of the social ladder in many ways. So for instance, in Kenya, like no one would ever, like if they met me, would have suspected me to be like a bad guy, right? So but sometimes in the US you would see like some level of suspicion if like you show up somewhere. So that actually was made me think quite a bit and just start to understand, like, right, there's like I'm in a different position. And obviously I started to learn about the history of Africans who are shipped to the US and the horrors of slavery. And and that was like a good explanation of the current state of things in the US. So it made me even more determined to say, hey, you know what, if we don't improve and if we don't up our game, the weak people get taken advantage by the strong. And that's why you can get enslaved, because people come with better technology and you're not ready to defend yourself, right? So I'm very worried about being weak in that sense, and I'm especially worried about being poor and vulnerable, because that's how we end up seeing Africans drowning in the ocean or working as almost like in slave-like conditions in some of these countries. So it's very important for us to make sure we don't get there, or we don't get our people to a point where they're desperate and they have their sense of self-worth is basically shattered because of the poverty that they experience and the sense of helplessness, right? So that's something that we all need to figure out how to run away from, and it's a very urgent and critical thing that we should be prioritizing.
So you are now at MIT and going through the MIT experience. How did the experience equip you towards this mission, which you had subconsciously started to push towards of avoiding situations where you could be the weak or be vulnerable and
Right.
should be equipped to help advance Africa or move us towards a much better position than when you left the continent.
Right. So, I think I loved the MIT ethos of, basically, the MIT motto is mind and hand, right? And at MIT, problem solving is at the core of the institution. So, in fact, homework at MIT is not called homework, it's called problem set. So, you get problem sets from your professor every now and then, and it's up to you to go and solve the problem sets, right? So the whole idea of problem solving then is like a huge is a huge part of the culture. And and you know so there's like entrepreneurship competitions would be there, and people would go up in front there and say, hey, the problem we're solving is for this industry, this is not possible, our new technology makes this possible. And then they'd win like $100,000, and sometimes they ended up becoming an important company. And at the back of my mind, I was thinking, but like we have all the problems in Africa. So we have like the huge source of problems, for people looking to solve problems. Like it's a great playground for problem solvers. Um, so then I thought, if you have the right tools to solve problems in Africa, then you would actually love it, because you'd have all these things that you can do there, and problems you could solve. And so I took that as a challenge in many ways. So I was very interested in entrepreneurship, at MIT, because I took part in the MIT Enterprise Forum. I took part in the MIT 50K competition. In those days, it was 50,000. I think nowadays it's 100,000 competition. So you pitch your idea, and the best ideas, can win like $100,000 to get started. So, I did actually take part in these competitions, and that's one of the, this was firing up my idea of like, okay, I should go back home and like start solving these problems, because I'm getting all these tools that I can use to solve problems. That's when everyone is starting to think about, okay, what are you gonna do when you graduate? People have like interviews with like all these companies. Goldman Sachs comes to campus, some people get flown to New York, right? So everyone is kind of in this mode where you're figuring out what to do. And I was starting to wonder, like, okay, what should I do next, right? And I think I spent a lot of time thinking about it and introspecting. And I think, I made a decision, and I said, okay, let me think about my life as a whole, because, this is going to be an important decision for my life. And I said, I want to make this decision in a way that I minimize the regrets I'll have, on my deathbed. So I said, what would, what's your plan? And I said, I want to spend my life in Africa, and I want to solve problems in Africa and do all these great things. And so I thought about, okay, given that that's what you would care really about in your life, what do you think about, this decision? Should you stay here in the US or go back? And I was like, I should come back. Like, I would be proud of myself looking back to have come back home. And I thought about it in a 50-year span, and I said, the first 10 years I probably will likely struggle and suffer, right? And then the other, years after that, I think I'll have caught up, and life will be good. So I think one thing about, maybe I should mention, when you go to MIT at some point, you really know that you'll never have to worry about like your basic needs ever again. So that gives you a sense of comfort, in terms of like, okay, even if I go back home, I can't starve, right? Worst case. So at least, I was like, as long as I have the basics covered, I'm gonna be fine. But I want to immerse myself in this place so that I learn how to solve the problems of this place, because that's what I really care about. And that's exactly what I did. So I decided, I'm gonna go back when I graduate. And I'm probably gonna feel like a failure for a while because of doing it, but I have a long-term plan, and I'm sticking to it. Right.
When you say you're going to feel like a failure for a while, could you give us a little more
Yeah.
details?
So I think the reason you're gonna feel like a failure is because you're gonna come back and have to start from scratch, right? You're not gonna be able to come back home in December and say, "Hey, I work in Wall Street. We just got a $50,000 bonus," right? And so your contemporaries, or like the people you went to school with, are gonna be coming home like that. So and that's actually what happened. Like, if when they came to Nairobi, they had like all this money, right? And for me at that point, I was just like, I'm here, I'm figuring things out. I want to build stuff. So I expected that kind of like slow start. And I just like, I was willing to do it, especially because I was like, I'm young, I don't have any kids, doesn't really matter. So let me just do it. And I don't mind looking like I'm not doing well for a while. So I think that's just the approach that you take, because there will be like if you see those guys and you see yourself at that point, you'll start to question your decisions at some point. And if you have a good grounding and just say, hey, it's okay, you guys can be there, I'm my own boss. Maybe if you guys spend all your money, by the end of the month we are still at the same point, because you had like, I make like almost no money, but I end up there. And you might make more money but spend a lot of that money, and we're in the same place. But anyway, um yeah, I just wanted to, the adventure part of it was a lot more, and the challenge part of it was a lot more intriguing. It's like you can start from the bottom of the race and now try to see if you'll catch up with the rest of the guys.
So now you're back in Kenya. What was the plan?
Right. Yeah, so my plan was like, I need to start a business as soon as possible, right? But because I didn't have any money, I said, let me find a part-time job, or a job at least to get into Kenya. So I ended up getting a consulting job at the World Bank. And basically I had that job for 6 months. For the first 6 months I was in Kenya. And what I did basically was just save almost all the money I got. I think by month 2, I had started, registered my company, found a tiny desk for someone to just sit there and be like the company secretary. I do my work, from morning to evening. Then I go home at night. And from like maybe 9 p.m. to like 2 a.m., I was working on my new business. And that was rinse and repeat until kind of the end of the 6 months, where basically what I was doing at night was like looking for jobs I could do as a business. And I camped on the UN website where they list all their tenders, and I was looking for like, okay, which tender could I do, and I would apply, to those opportunities, and I would apply as if I was like I was using the standards of like a Fortune 500 firm. Like my thinking was, when my application lands on that table, it needs to look as if it came from like a Fortune 500 business. Because I was like, it's just paper. I'm sure I can make it work. So got like really good logos, really good fonts. Everything is super well structured, buy the nicest envelopes and everything. So I always was like, it's going to stand out from the packaging to when you open it, you're reading it, you're going to say like there's color, there's just, I've gone over and above what you'd have expected a tender person to do. And that's going to communicate something about us as a company and our ambition is like, we're going to give you like a level of service that is better than you expect. And I think that's actually how we ended up winning like our first project with UNICEF, is that. So, because we had no, experience, no background, nothing, but I think they were willing to give us a chance. And obviously it also didn't hurt that I could say they have an MIT degree. And also, so that kind of helps to build, some confidence in it. Yeah, and so by the end of the 6 month, I had like my first project, with UNICEF, because I was like, okay, these guys are safe. They are not. No one is gonna ask me for corruption money, like, because I was trying to do everything clean, right? Yeah, and so I got my first project, and it was a data project, and I was able to hire like 10 university students as part-time workers, and we did a data digitization job for them. And we just went over and above, like, what they expected. We cleaned up the data 2 times just to make sure it was very nice. And so when we delivered the work to them, they just came back and said, we love your job, how you did this. We've got like a much bigger job coming up, and you're gonna need like more than double these people you have here. And so one day they called me there and took me there, and it was just like a whole room full of papers, and they were like, can you digitize this for us? And that's how I found, basically, like, about, by the end of the first year, I had like 40 students, or 40 people working in a room in Nairobi, and fulfilling this work for UNICEF. And I made money. Like, I think I made like $30,000 from that project. And so I was very, up in the clouds, and I was like, okay, I thought this is gonna take 10 years, but in 3 months, it just took a year, right? So I was lucky to, to actually have some early success, just doing that. Yeah, but that's basically how, I got started.
So I have two questions for you. One is, given that you had said originally that the Africa was replete with problems,
Right.
the how come you didn't come in with a problem you were looking to solve?
I think the basically, I was looking to figure out a way to get started, right? How can I make money? Like, I need to first get some money, right?
Right.
Because you need to solve the money problem. So, and I was like, I can be a good, I can provide great services here in Africa, and I think that's good, because I ended up actually also providing job opportunities for a lot of those university students, right? So I saw it as part of kind of like, me getting into the workforce, and yeah.
The second question is corruption money. Nobody is asking for corruption money. Something you
Yeah.
said. Can you tell us, kill the layer on that one?
Yeah. So I think, back to kind of like, this, I think, this picture I gave you of being on your deathbed. one thing I wanted to do was to say, okay, I feel most proud of myself for not even done any corruption, right? And I don't want to take any shortcuts. So, I think when I came back, my options were basically like, are you gonna try to get any projects with the government? Probably not. And you're like a very young guy. You need to know people. You don't know anybody, right? Are you gonna try to do this with like Kenyan corporates? Maybe you could do that, but I just felt like they were not as kind of, they would not be as international as like the UN, right? Because the UN was very transparent. We list all our projects, you apply, and maybe whoever gets it, And I also knew probably like the people in the UN would kind of give some respect to an MIT degree more. So it's just how I thought about like figuring out how to, where am I gonna knock first? Which doors are likely to be opened for me or which make sense for me. So yeah, that's why I opted for that route.
So you have $30,000 in your pocket, enough to get started. What was your next move with
Right.
the entrepreneurial vision?
Yeah. So, I think I was a bit heady at that point, and I was like, I need to teach people how to do this, what I just did, right? um, so my next project was something which I call the Africa Business and Leadership Excellence Center. It's like the ABLE Center. Like I wanted to call it ABLE Center or something like that. Those were the meaning of the acronym. Um, and so I went to town and like hired a room. And I had an office downstairs and upstairs was a classroom. And I put together like some of my entrepreneurship lectures, which I had created a while back, and I updated some of them, and then I bought some chairs, like all the furniture, everything, and then I started doing ads on the newspaper saying, "Hey, do you want to learn about entrepreneurship and all that? Come." So you pay some money, you come and you go through this course that I was teaching. So I was kind of doing that. Um, but it just didn't really work. Let's say, I mean, some people did show up, and I did, I took them through this course, but it just didn't take off. Like, it just never, because a lot of people are coming there saying, can you give me like a degree so that I can be able to show it, like, so that, because it's like parents would come and say, will my son get like a degree or something? And to me, I was like, but the degree is meaningless. Anyway, so then I was like, if they need that, then maybe I'm not being successful in teaching it. So I think for me, it was like a great learning lesson for me, because at the end of it, I was like, okay, this has failed. I was claiming to teach people about like business, and my own business has failed. Maybe I need to go and actually build like a real business that succeeds. And I can come back and like teach people based on like real success. So, that's basically how that project ended up. And the next thing, I sold all my furniture and I closed the whole place. And like, I went home being like, okay, that has failed. And I need to go back home and now re-strategize and think again. And I was like, yeah, I expected I'll fail at some point. But it was quite humbling, having come from like a big success to like a big failure. And I learned some really important lessons actually from that, which was, I had spent way too much money on the office and like on the room, like upfront. And then I had this running expense of rent that was just being, coming at me every month. So the next venture I started, I was like, I'm gonna be very careful about how I handle money, and try and preserve as much capital as possible so that you can survive for a very long time. So I think that was kind of the biggest lesson from that.
How Can you draw a line between your future successes and that failure?
Yeah. I think, as I said, so when we now started, like, other companies, what we've tried to do in the beginning is to be very lean in the beginning. So, for example, I see a lot of people coming from the diaspora, and you think, let's say, you want to start a company, and you kind of want to look like a company in the beginning, from the get-go, like have a nice office, have like all these nice things that give you the look, right? Whereas my approach changed to being like, okay, I have this money. I want to make sure we don't run out. So I'd rather get it a tiny little corner with two chairs and whatever, and like save my capital as much as possible, because I know it's gonna be a lot harder than I expect. So you definitely want to avoid the temptation to kind of like look professional before you can afford it, or look successful before you are actually successful, because sometimes it's also just part of human nature, where if someone comes into to ask you, hey, so where are you working out right now? You've moved back to Lagos or to Nairobi, and you show them a tiny little cubicle in the corner, then they are just like, moved like this big name place to be in this, like, in the little cave, right? So it might tempt you to kind of like spend more money on like how improve the look, but um over time you learn that that's very risky, in terms of you've got like you've saved your money, and you want to preserve your money as much as possible, so that you don't run out of runway. So that's an important lesson, for I think for a lot of people trying to do something like that.
Can you take us through when you knew you had built something that truly worked and mattered?
Right. Yeah. So in 2010, we started a company called Africa Stocking at that point. And actually, the reason we called it Africa Stocking was, we wanted to build a tech company that was res- respectable for Africa. And we wanted people, when they saw a company, to be like, okay, Africa is talking. Like, we have, we at least have something, right? Because, we are like, okay, China has Alibaba, like all these guys. India has this guys. Like, how about us? Like, we need, right? And we were thinking about, like, can we have something like that? So, and we did actually try quite a number of different things, and fail at those things, because the idea we started out with was, can we build a marketplace for Africa that was similar to Alibaba? But we quickly learned, okay, you know what, Alibaba is helping Chinese producers sell to the world. If we're helping African producers, what are Africans selling or producing, right? And we kind of got stuck there, because we were like, okay, we're mostly producing like vegetables and like all this kind of like agricultural stuff, minerals, and they came with a lot of restrictions about like importing, exporting, and all that. So it just felt like it wasn't gonna work. So we gave up on it. And we tried like a Groupon type entity, where we'd go to restaurants and ask them, do you want to create deals and sell at 40% and less? And we also just felt friction, like it wasn't working, right? Like the sales were not happening. We had to push so hard. It was like so difficult. And then when we switched over like our business to like communications, or to SMS, like the same week we had built like our very first product, someone came to the office, saw the product, and wrote us a check. And it just felt easy, right? And it was just like the level of friction just dropped away. So I think that's when you start to feel like, okay, you know what, I've got something that has wings, and this plane can actually fly. And so then we basically doubled down on that, and like went really deep into communications. And we got very lucky when we built this API platform for developers after we did a tech accelerator. And we had an advisor there saying, yeah, it's great that you guys are building these SMS products, but can you share what you have with others so that other developers like you who want to build this don't have to, struggle to get the connections that you guys have struggled to get, so that you open it up, right? And it felt like a very counterintuitive idea because, we'd struggled so hard to get this. And our instinct was like, we should hold what we have and keep it for ourselves. But the idea here was like, hey, open it up, let other people use this, and you just charge them for access. And so, when we turned around and actually started doing that, that's when we started seeing just like explosive growth. And that just took off. So I think that was like a big lesson for us where, sometimes your growth or, the way you're going to succeed is by empowering other people. And I think there's lots of opportunities for those kinds of things in Africa still, because a lot of times I think, the reason some of these opportunities are hidden is that many people in Africa, you grow up with a scarcity mentality that tells you if you struggle to find something and you finally get it, hold it and protect it and keep it. And if everybody comes to try to use it, charge them an arm and a leg for it, right? And therefore, you basically end up with like this small outpost of someone who has like, something like a license or something like that, that's expensive to get, and you have many hurdles. So you'll see, no, it's so hard to work with the big banks or to work with the insurance companies because they're like, if you don't want to work with us, go get your own license or go get, right? But what that does is that, it tends to stifle a lot of innovation, and it blocks access, and it temporarily makes the market look a lot smaller than it actually is. So, those are some of the hidden sources of opportunity for you is to go there and actually share and empower other people.
So here you, as you mentioned, were counterintuitive. Everybody else was charging an arm and a leg as a result of the scarcity mindset, and you decided to go cheap or go low. And within your first year, you were getting revenues of over $1 million. So here you were back at the mountaintop.
Right.
With that success, how did it change or inform your belief system about what's possible on the continent?
Yeah, I mean, it did definitely make it look, make me feel like, you know what, there's definitely like a huge amount of opportunity in this continent. It's hidden in some ways, but it's there. It's right there. And you just need to go and get it. So, I think it was very empowering and reaffirming, because now at some point, all of a sudden, when my friends came back from New York in December, we were now kind of on the same terms, right? But I was a bit lucky that now I'm at home, right? So, it's like, and we creating job opportunities. We ended up having like, the company kept growing. We ended up having like close to 100 employees, and we across so many different countries in Africa. And it just was very kind of affirming of the choice to head back home. And I think that's what success will do, is like when you finally get there and you start to see that what you saw in the beginning is actually you've been lucky enough to make it happen. It's a very special feeling.
Then you got restless again because you didn't feel like you were solving a problem. So you had to look for the next problem. Tell us about that journey towards finding the next problem and trying to solve it?
Yeah, so I think I started to get to a point where I felt like we're not moving fast enough, or there's still so much to do on the continent. We should be doing a lot more. So yeah, so I started thinking about, okay, what next? And I think I had a very influential trip to China with Alibaba, and just so kind of the sort of impact that Alibaba has had in China. And it just challenged, it was so challenging, and to just say, like, what you've done is like nothing. Because before that I could probably have felt like, what, we've been very successful, but when you go there, you suddenly feel like, you're like, you've done nothing. It's like a drop in the ocean. And so, I think that made me want to get back and, do more. And, so I started looking at, how can we help small shops across Africa. I think there's more than like, I think in Kenya, there's more than like 300,000 of those kind of shops. And we're trying to figure out, okay, how can we bring technology to these small shops, and that basically was like my next project, which I worked on, and we built basically like a tool to gather data, because we'd identified that there is part of the reason there was so much opacity in those small traders was like nobody knew what actually is going on, and so we needed to capture the data. And we'd come up with, I'd met a friend who was a computer vision engineer, and so we basically came up on this idea of like, what if we could create a camera that could automatically detect products as they were sold, through this tiny hole that is usually there in a shop. So if you could put like a little camera, so you say there's milk being sold like that, and then aggregate this data and share it with the fast moving consumer goods guys. Maybe we you know a logistics system. So yeah, so to long and short, we built this product, and we started showcasing it. We raised like a couple $1 million for the startup, and at some point, we ended up meeting with Mastercard Labs, and they said, we love this project. We'd love to have it in our lab, and they ended up making an offer to acquire the business, and that's what we did. We basically sold the business, or we got acquired by Mastercard.
When you think about impacts, what matters most to you?
I think it's shifting mindsets and moving the needle. So people start to believe that something is possible that may not have been possible before. So I think that's really important. Is mindset shift is like the number one thing that needs to first happen. And when you suddenly, you might find someone who looks helpless and they're just sitting down and they feel like nothing can work. But if you show them that something is possible, then they get fired up and they get energetic and they start doing something. And that's really what I think ends up making a difference. So yeah, so we do need that mindset shift in terms of making impact, and providing people access to opportunities is a key part of that.
And how have you, or are you doing that with all of the entrepreneurial work you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think mostly is also kind of teaching by doing. So now, I don't have to have a class and tell you that this is possible. You can see, okay, what you've built, we've built this and this. Maybe at some point, when I'm done with this, I'll try and get back on like up and, actually like, helping people, or, mentoring and teaching, I've mostly kind of been at this point doing, I've been like an angel investor in some startups, or yeah, just giving people some advice on what to do. But I'd love to build like a really important, successful business, and that changes the trajectory of a lot of things, similar to what Alibaba has done in China. And yeah, and then that fires up a lot more people to also want to do the same, and we all build together.
And I believe you're also sponsoring some kids in your former school as well.
Yeah. So one of the things actually which happened is, I was able to have an exit in one of my previous startups, and I sold to the IFC and to Orange, and I got quite a bit of money for me at that point. And so one of the things, so Starre Boys Center is one of those schools where there are a lot of needy students, and it had been started as a net blind institution for initially. Actually, it was for street kids, but it ended up becoming, like, let's say, one of the best high schools in Kenya. So usually when you live in form 4, that's basically what you call it. We had to make a pledge that if our circumstances allowed, we would allow other kids to have a chance. That's one of the things I was quite lucky to be able to do, is be able to get some 10 kids to go through like the 4-year program at that school, and kind of fulfill that, what they call the charge in high school.
You want to say a few words about ChatSasa?
Yeah. So basically, so right now what I'm working on is I'm helping businesses to grow, and we're looking at how can we grow as a business. The most important thing is you need to listen to your customers, and then you need to talk to them. Now that sounds very easy, but as you know, listening is not that easy. It takes a lot to listen. Number one, you need to be like willing to listen. So you find that a lot of these companies, they have a website, they have a mobile application, but it's really difficult to reach anybody there. So what we're helping businesses is to say, hey, here's a chat widget you can add to your website. So if someone is on your website, they can quickly talk to somebody, right? Or on your mobile application. Or, if you want to talk to people where they already are, on WhatsApp, on even on social media, you want to listen to what people are saying about your business, we can enable you to basically, see all of those things happening in one single dashboard, right? And also, talking to your customers is like, it's not, as I said, it's not that simple. You need to know, who are you talking to? Am I talking to the VIP customer? Or is this just another person who's asking, right? So let's say you're a bank, you have different types of customers, and if you annoy the customer that is, has the biggest bank balance and they leave, that's not good, right? So we help you to have like good profiles of like who you're talking to, so that you're able to converse with them and to do this kind of customer interactions at a large scale, so that, because most of these enterprises are dealing with, let's say, hundreds of thousands or even millions of customers.
And how is that going?
Yeah, it's going well, and we're excited about the possibilities. So hopefully next time I come here, if I do, we'll talk a little bit about that story.
Great.
Yeah.
See, you just pledged, everybody heard you, commit to coming back. So we will hold you to that.
Yes.
As we look back, or as you look back, are there any actions or learnings that you will be willing to recommend to others who seek to walk the same path that you have, whether entrepreneurial or a return back to their home country?
Right. So, yeah, I mean, I think, it's one thing, I think there's a time I went to India and I met this man, And I met him in a state in India called Maharashtra. And he told me, hey, he asked me, where are you from? And I told him, I'm from Kenya. And he said, no, you're not from Kenya. You're from Africa. I said, no, Africa is not a country. It's Kenya. And he told me, look, you're not thinking about it right. I'm in Maharashtra. This population of Maharashtra is bigger than the population of Kenya. But I don't say I'm from Maharashtra. I say I'm from India when I'm talking to customers. So you want to actually think of, of yourself as an African from the get-go. And just be very open to that, because, you've got people who want to come back to, Africa, but maybe their country of origin is actually not a great place to start from. But there's some countries where you actually, have a decent chance at, starting. So don't confine yourself, basically. I mean, the other, basically, way of thinking about it is, don't confine yourself to the village you grew up in. You can move out to the city. And if you can move out to the city, you can also move out from your country to another, to Africa, basically, which gives you the ability to kind of see the continent as a whole. And you can start to make some impact, and you can start to make things happen, and if you find a fertile ground to start.
It's profound. So are there any final words you wish to share with us, Eston?
Yeah, I think it's our responsibility and our obligation as Africans to change the trajectory of the continent. And if we don't take that job seriously, it'll come back to bite us, and it'll be a source of much regret. And like in the old days, when you were growing up in the village, there was like a group of warriors whose job was to defend the village from other attacks from outside, right? And people are willing to sacrifice their lives to defend their village. So in the same way, we need to be willing to make some sacrifices to make sure we're not left being very weak and vulnerable. And we need to get our act together, and just build a better future for this continent.
Thank you, Eston. You have shared your insights, you've shared your experiences, and also provided some recommendations on how to trade that return for those out there who are looking for and unaware of how to return back to the continent. This is the Africa2100 Podcast, and I'm your host, Chudi Obiaya. Thanks for listening in, and please don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next episode.